I originally wrote this as part of my piece called Is the EU Democratic? However, I quickly started to realise that my piece on the EU had only ended up actually half being on the EU. So I decided to split it off and turn it into a video of its own. When talking about the relative democraticness of a foreign democracy, it proves quite useful to compare both its similarities and differences to that of the UK. So if you want to watch my original video, I'll link to it here. In the UK, we have two main legislative bodies and one main executive body, these being the government, the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Most countries around the world and the EU are broadly structured like this. The executive body in the UK is the government, including the Cabinet of Ministers, and whoever leads this is the Prime Minister, which is currently this guy. Now, to become PM, you don't actually have to win an election, but rather just selected as the leader of the largest party. In fact, 3 of our last 4 Prime Ministers all became PM without first winning an election. This is something which, while on paper sounds bad, I've personally never had too much of an issue with, because in the UK we have a system whereby you elect the party and not the individual, and the alternative would be a presidential system like they have in America, which gives much greater power to the individual and, you know. The newly appointed Prime Minister then selects individuals covering various subject areas to serve on the Cabinet. These people normally come from the elected House of Commons, but they can also come from the unelected House of Lords. The primary legislative branch is called the House of Commons, and this is elected with a system called first past the post. Replacing first past the post with something called proportional representation is something that I personally feel very strongly about, and I will definitely be covering in a future video. But broadly it means that not all votes count the same, depending on where they're from or which party they're for. The upshot of this is that only some opinions are represented in Parliament, whereas others have no representation at all. For instance, in 2015, the Conservatives formed a majority government based off of 37% of the vote, while the Greens, Liberal Democrats and UKIP, despite collectively having 24% of the votes, only received 1.5% of the members of Parliament. And then we have the House of Lords. The House of Lords is made up of completely unelected, lifelong peers, and even some hereditary peers, meaning that they inherited their peerage from one of their parents. It doesn't get much more medieval than that. Fortunately, the House of Lords is not quite as powerful as it used to be, due to 2 things called the Parliaments Act and the Salisbury Convention. The Parliaments Act means that the House of Lords is unable to block legislation for more than a year, and the Salisbury Convention is an uncodified rule that they will not block any legislation that was in the government's manifesto. So that's how the UK's democracy is structured. But how do laws come about? Laws come from either the government or the legislator in private or public bills. They then go through a process called ping pong, where they move back and forth between the Houses of Commons and the Houses of Lords until a final draft can be reached. If a final draft is reached, this then goes on for approval by the Queen and ascension into law. So to recap, the UK has a partially representative Parliament elected through first past the post. The Cabinet is then made up of individuals elected to the House of Commons through this same system and are therefore an extension of the minority rule that it produces. And then finally you have the totally unelected House of Lords, who I'm going to give a big 0 in terms of democraticness. So is the UK democratic? Well, I guess a bit, depending on where you live and who you vote for, but it needs serious, far-reaching systematic reforms. If you're interested to see how the EU holds up against it, then please watch my companion video, which I'll link to here. Hi guys, thanks for watching my video. I just wanted to conclude by saying that when writing this in its companion video, one thing that seemed to keep coming up again and again was our electoral system. I personally feel that our lack of proportional representation is one of our democracy's biggest flaws. It's easy with problems like this to feel helpless and that there's nothing that you can do to change it, but there is. If it's something you feel strongly about, then I recommend that you join either Make Votes Matter, or if you're a member of Labour, Labour for a New Democracy. They're both great organisations with a lot of volunteer roles that you can do if you've got a couple of hours or even a couple of minutes free a week. I'm going to do a video on both of these topics at some point, so if that's something that would be of interest to you, then please give this video a thumbs up. Thanks.